Hi! Are we awake? Are we here? Good. I'd like to have eyes and ears focused in. That'll be great. Can't help being the second grade teacher that I was. So thank you, everyone. Well, first of all, I'm so happy that all of you are here today. My name is Laureen Chu. I was a striker. I was 19, so about 50 years ago, and great privilege to be back. And I had the experience of spending 20 days in jail because of the mass bust for that strike, as of many of us who are here today. So I'd like the strikers who are here today to please stand up, turn around, and say hello to our fellow students here. So, 50 years ago, the student-led BSU TWLF strike changed this campus and opened doors to not only students of color and faculty of color, but to a broad range of women and men who had been excluded from or overlooked in higher ed. Now that extraordinary movement spread from San Francisco State across America. Everybody was embracing the notion that we needed to open up universities, expand the curriculum, and study the contributions of people of color and their communities to our nation's history and society. Today, we are here to celebrate and revisit events leading up to the strike itself, and reveal some lessons from the strike for the present and the future. Unfortunately, in 2019, we are called to confront new fears and racism. We are poised to becoming more and more intolerant of those who are different than us. We can't let that happen. So we need to recommit ourselves to what was changed because of the fight for civil rights and gains that were made 50 years ago. That is why today, October 7th, 2019, we have the unique and historic opportunity to experience veteran strikers' narratives of 50+ years ago, illustrating the frustrations and challenges as well as the commitment and passion it took to organize, fight, and sustain an agenda for productive change in our communities through ethnic studies curricula. You know, this celebration and this celebratory event signals that the collective we, and I mean we, the 68 BSU TWLF strikers, the College of Ethnic Studies, faculty, students, staff, and the rest of San Francisco State universities, that we are together in honoring the history and struggle of those who were responsible for establishing our College of Ethnic Studies 50 years ago, and we will stand together in seeing that it continues to grow and flourish. We cannot allow the future to succumb to old hatred and the creation of new biases towards others. Most of all, we cannot be blind and apathetic to what this new thing called Make America Great Again movement is doing to dismantle the gains we made over a half a century ago. I think not just myself, but our hope is that today and this week's event will provide the strength and inspiration we need to continue the fight that began more than 50 years ago. And you are our future. So today, I hope you, not just you, but you learn and listen, and we would love to also learn and listen from you. So without further ado, I'd like to present our first panel. Thank you very much.
Good morning.
Good morning.
First, let me thank Laureen Chu, who who's really been our boss, our very supportive facilitator in putting this process together. So would you give her a hand? She's really... My name is James. In those days I was called Jimmy Garrett. I was one of the people that was a part of the early days in the formation of what became the Black Student Union, and I was the second chair of the Black Student Union at San Francisco State. The panel that we have put together today will attempt to address the antecedents, the times just before the strike took place. These times you have to battle a great deal because there are some concepts that things just happen. They're events and they just happen. Two elephants above my ass and the strike fell out on a hot rock. The reality is that what I've learned, and I've spent a lot of time in Asia, is that sometimes it can take 20 years to become an overnight success. The movement that led to this strike really, in and of itself, is 50 years old. It was 50 years old when the strike started. So when the strike commenced, some of us had our lives changed such that we went on to be deeply involved in the movement for the rest of our lives. For some of us, our lives stopped in the spring of 1969. So far as I'm concerned, a critical thing is to break through that, particularly as Sister Chu laid out, because in 3.5 years, this nation, this country has, the circumstances of it, this new, particularly authoritarian age, has put us in a situation where it'll take another 50 years, or it may take another 50 years, to just recoup to the place where we're in the bad times we are now. Let alone thinking forward to how can we preserve the planet, or I shouldn't say that, that's a bad thing to say. Not preserve the planet, preserve ourselves on the planet for the next 1,000 years. Because the planet's going to be here, the question is whether we're going to be here or not. The panelists include Dr. Conell Persico, who was one of my early comrades when I came on the campus in late fall of '65 to begin work. I was an organizer for SNCC, and Persico was one of that base of progressive students. He'll give his own intro, but for my sensibilities, he and Brother Roger Varnado, who's out here, too, were the people that who were not black, that I hooked up with when I first came on campus, and we immediately, after some discussion and debate, began to lay out things. He has remained in education and become one of the leaders in the field of education over these past years. Second is my hanging buddy, or I'm his hanging buddy, pardon me, Jared Varnado. I'm part of his crew. And or posse, or whatever you guys call them now, entourage. But I met Jerry soon as Jerry and George Murray, Benny Stewart, Mariam Al-Wadi. Soon after I came on the campus, Jerry is going to discuss, I hope, that transition from the early days of a few black students on campus and a few non-white students on the campus to the point where the strike took place, where we had grown from 300 students of color on the campus to 2,000 in a matter of 2.5 years. So we'll talk about the building of that that's what we'll talk about, is the building of that movement on the campus. My job is to take a few minutes to try to provide a little bit of historical context, how we got to that point. After World War II, the United States emerged as the principal power on earth. Greatest power on earth. It was so great that it began to quickly replace all these colonial powers. Before World War II, there was a British Empire, there was a French Empire, there was a Dutch Empire, there was a Japanese Empire. And there was one little corner called the Soviet Union that was being crushed by everybody, trying to get itself together. But there were a number of European empires that the war, World War II, and the Nazi forces crushed. So at the end of World War II, almost all of Europe was decimated. The United States had built its economy on that war, and it emerged out of that war by destroying two cities in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, by dropping the atom bomb. They had transformed the universe, or transformed this universe, so that they were the great power. What does a great power do in those circumstances? They invade every sinew of anything that already exists, assume that, take that over, control it, and redirect its energies toward its interests, its goals, at least the leading global forces at that time. The major global force coming out of that war was something called international finance capital. Capitalism had consolidated itself around the United States and that great power, and it was guiding and directing, giving its powerful forces to reconstruct the entire world in its image, using whatever potential it could, economic, social, education, anything that it could, to control the entire globe. So the United States begins to reconstruct itself. The United States had not even consolidated its own land mass. It was still fighting the Apache in 1934. So it's only 10 years from consolidating its own base by trying to destroy the various Native American nations. So it's new to this. It's new to this development, but now it hasn't. And it's over that next 40 years, nearly 50 years, the economy of the United States expanded by more than 400%. And in that realm, it needed to replace all these former colonial nations. Now, the former colonies in Asia, Africa, Latin America, etc., were also coming out of that war with the belief that they should have their own national sovereignty. And the U.S. had to control those natural national sovereignty movements, which were movements in some cases just to consolidate the land that they were on, or to fight wars of national liberation. So the U.S. had to take up that piece, or it did take up that piece. Why? Because it wanted to consolidate its domination over the world. In order to do that, it needed trained and educated people. It needed people educated in war. It needed people educated in construction. That's how Germany was rebuilt, by the infusion of finance into Germany. That's how the English Ford, if any of you have been to England, the English Ford is a combination of the Ford Motor Company, and they set up their apparatus to build Fords in England. Did the same thing in Japan under General Douglas MacArthur. Very repressive circumstance to rebuild. It moved into areas in South Korea, which precipitated, within 10 years, a war. At the same time, it needed that secondary level. It needed to replace all those colonial administrators around the world with its own national group. And it also needed to expand its own educational base. In the 1930s, the amount of money spent by the federal government in the U.S. on education was about 3% of its budget. By 1950, the education industry was the third largest industry in this country, after steel and automobile industry, because they retained their capacity by producing not only consumer goods but also military armaments. So they needed to train sectors of people. What that did was do two things. It opened up doors for a larger sector of the white population, that is the human sector. And they began to pump money into public education. They also left, on an incremental basis, some space for non-whites. The HBCUs, the historically black colleges and universities, were basically funded by the GI Bill because so many GIs coming out of the war went to those HBCUs. In fact, that's part of the foundation for the Black Student Union. A number of the people who came into into San Francisco State through the GI Bill were former people coming out of the military. They pumped money into laws and through bills to try to expand the educational sector. So that in California, they had something called Blueprint for Education that they published, was at 60 or 61. And that Blueprint for Education, they're going to pump tremendous amount of money into the field of education, but they had to stratify it. So that the lowest level would be what I attended, East Los Angeles Community College. None of you from LA, so you don't know what I'm talking about, but they were, home folks. I went to East Los Angeles Community College because it was too far for me to go to UCLA, but the East Los Angeles Community College, that's where the mass of people are going to be educated for trained skills. The second level were the state colleges, which were the technocrats and the educators and the social workers who would oversee that first group. And then the third group would be that 1% of the 5%. 1% of the most wealthy and the 5% of those who could make the grades and also the hue so that they could get into these colleges. That's UC Berkeley, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole set of private schools, like Stanford. When we went down to organize the Black Student Union at Stanford in 1967, there were 37 black students on the campus. Half of them were from the African continent. Within 2 years, there were 350 black students on the campus. Why? Because in 2 years, black people went from being unqualified to attend Stanford to being very qualified to attend Stanford, because Stanford didn't want what was happening at San Francisco State to happen at Stanford. In San Francisco, a very interesting situation is taking place. San Francisco is basically downtown San Francisco and suburbs. It's a port city. The ILWU is a powerful union. It has its metropolitan base housed the Giannini family's bank, which was called the Bank of America. After the earthquake, the Catholic Church funded the Giannini family to build what became the Bank of America, so that even up until 1965, the Catholic Church owned about 30% of the Bank of America, and that's how it got itself funded. That is, Catholics put their money into the till on Sunday, and that money was run right out to build the capitalist, what we have now, the Manhattanization of San Francisco right now. That was a good part of this bill. The other thing was a number of communities began to formed, consolidated and expanded. Filipino community out of World War II. Black communities began to form, then rapidly expanded into Hunters Point, Fillmore, Potrero Hill, at least two sectors of the Asian community, Chinese community that had been in San Francisco for 150 years at that point, were in what was then the Chinatown community, and then Japantown, which was Fillmore. Those areas began to expand, develop, and people began to work out their own historical developments there. That replicated itself at San Francisco State, at least during the time that I was there, as was mentioned earlier, just before you guys got here, that people had to come together and work through their contradictions within this framework. How we got here, San Francisco State, and then I'll end with that. The dominant forces, the controlling forces, international finance capitalism and white supremacy, dominated both the ideology and the power. But they needed more, and they didn't have enough people with an intellectual or technical capacity to do the work. That opened doors for people like myself to get into school, to move up the ladder. I'll tell you how deep it was. They passed bills, as Sister mentioned earlier, the comprehensive employment training. On this campus, when I applied to go to San Francisco State, I think I paid a fee to register. There was something then that was called work study. We built a whole movement with work study. Because that brought students from who had to work at Bank of America at night, especially sisters working at Pac Bell, etc., working. I mean, because this is a working class, the people who were attending school at that time were working people, because there were jobs, because the economy was expanding, because the empire was expanding. So there was room for people. So we had work study, and I'm telling you that $1.20 to $2 an hour carried numbers of us into the professions. So that was one piece of it. The second piece was room had to be the educational industry, especially at the academy level, declared itself to be the liberal bastion. No segregation here. It wasn't like the South. We had to have a broad opening. Everybody could come. And so what we did was take that liberal establishment at its word. You go on the campus, you begin to build your organization, and all you do is to say, the liberal campus is an open campus. But it's not. It's a closed campus. It is a controlling campus. You find little spaces, little edges that you open it up for. That's how we affected initially that historical context. It was structured. An umbrella, a powerful umbrella, is sitting on top of whatever we do. And our responsibility, as Benny Stewart, I used to call them cadre. We trained cadre, or as Benny Stewart calls them, problem solvers. People who were trained, who were going to not only be trained with technical skills, but with a sense of consciousness that they would spend their entire lives using whatever skills that they had developed, whatever information they had developed to benefit their communities. Now you're fighting within the framework of an institution or institutions that already say they do that. But of course they don't. And so the notion is to challenge that institution and to the institutions and agencies and individuals who control that institution. That's the battle lines. The top institution manifests itself, the liberal coalition, the powerful forces, the international finance capital, the big banks, the Democratic Party, the moderate wing of the Republican Party, liberal philanthropy, liberal churches, all of those people come together. And when I was growing up, they had Thanksgiving, and then they had the big table for the adults and the little table for the less than adults. Y'all don't do Thanksgiving anymore. Okay, so they don't have the children's sector. Y'all have to sit in the same table? You have that little table. So anyway, the point is that blacks, Asians, Mexicans, broad sectors of the women had to all sit at the little table. What that did was to do two things. One is force us to communicate with each other. The second thing is we look for the weaknesses for those at the big table. And if those weaknesses that we use as our energizing mechanisms to develop a way to come to grips with the struggles that we have to carry on. Thank you very much.
So I want to talk about the lead up to the strike in the 60s in San Francisco. I want to talk particularly about the campus, and I want to put it in the context of two conflicting educational models. And then what was going on during the 60s was I'm Persico. I'm Conell used to be called Joe Persico. Came here in '61, worked in a variety of programs, and the place felt like home. So, let me do this. So I just want to basically talk about the value differences that were inherent in two competing educational models. One, which, and I'll explain some of this in a minute, in loco parentis, and the other of self-determination, led to both a creative and political activism and an ever-increasing use of force and power to repress that activism. I don't think you can separate the two. As the one developed, so did the repressive forces develop to squelch it. And as those differences became more sharply focused on race and racism, the full force of the state was utilized to restore external control of people's lives. Now, in loco parentis is Latin for in place of the parent. And as Jimmy talked about, the creation of the Master Plan for Higher Education was a clear plan to staff the corporate and growth and development in this country. And so there was a tiered state of education. 3 classes, each class received a subsidy from the state that grew greater as you went up the ladder. It was essential to build the economic juggernaut that was anticipated to make sure that that all worked very clearly and in standardized form. Clark Kerr, who was the president of the UC system and one of the main articulators of the master plan, made a statement early in the 60s to the corporate community that the employers would love the generation then entering college. They're going to not press many grievances. They're going to be easy to handle. There aren't going to be any riots, which was exactly how sage they were. Now, at San Francisco State, there was a different set of forces at play that reflected a notion of self-determination as the basis for the education. The development of one's own self, one's creative juices, one's political juices. And here, there was a statement that was prepared that was to govern the life of students and activities on the campus. It's called the Statement of Philosophy on Student Activities. And it simply read that students are respected as adults and citizens of the community, and as such have all the rights and responsibilities of adults and citizens to participate in college and community affairs. Now, one of our brilliant student body leaders in the early days made the remark in taking that a step further that we as students are in college to receive an education, and so let us begin discussing the type of education we're going to receive. Now, as the self-determination movement got generated on the campus, there were 2 forms that took place: protest and program development. I want to talk a bit about program development first. There was a decision by the left on this campus in 1962 to gain control of student government and to use it as a vehicle for determining relevance in the educational enterprise and for organizing and building strong connections between students and the communities from which they came. It was essential student government had resources, so as Jimmy talked, for example, about work-study funds, we could produce the 25% of funds that enabled us to get 75% of federal funds that would enable us to create jobs for people to do work as tutors and other types of things. I want to talk just briefly for a second about 4 programs. The first program developed was the tutorial program. Students from this campus worked out in communities, working with children from poverty backgrounds on learning to read, and discovered that in fact these children could easily learn to read under the right conditions. And we learned the right conditions, and they learned to read. And at one point there were 400 students from here involved with multiple numbers of students across multiple communities in San Francisco. There was another program that we attempted to do called the Summer Community Involvement Leadership Training Program, which preceded the Mississippi Summer Project in 1964. We allocated student body funds to send students to participate in the Freedom Schools and the training in Oxford, Ohio, and then to go to the Summer Project to establish connections with Southern Black colleges so that there would begin to be much more of a clear sense of purpose. That program failed, and I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. As students came back from the tutorial program experience, it became very clear that children alone were not the only people in the community that could benefit from the help of college students. So we created the Community Involvement Program, which began to work in communities with adult populations around a multiplicity of issues. That was, later on came into, well, I'll talk about that later on. The other program was the Experimental College, which was an unbelievable experience of creative development. It started out where anyone could teach a course about any subject. It became, after that, a much clearer sense of how do we establish a relevant education, how do we take the current disciplines and clarify their limitations and develop a new form of education. At one point in 1967, there were 1,200 students involved in those programs. There were 70 professors providing academic credit. There was a course series called the 77, 177, 277 series. I stand before you as having received a master's degree completely through the 177 series. The final culminating point of that was the Center for Educational Innovation. A remarkable set of programs and the representation of 4 to 5 years of work. The center included the Youth Services Institute that had evolved out of the tutorial program, included the Community Services Institute evolved out of work study, the Institute for Creative Development that evolved out of the Experimental College, the Black Studies Institute, which had evolved out of the work being done through originally Black Arts and Culture in the Experimental College as the Negro student emerged to the BSU and created the Black Studies program, and a Media Innovations Institute. It was a stunning piece of work. Also want to talk about, so that was the kind of program development that was taking place on the campus. There were also a set of protests, and they're numerous, but I'll talk about 2 particularly. One in December of 1967, which there was a protest sit-in in the administration building that was organized by the BSU in conjunction with a group called MAPS, the Movement Against Political Suspension. In February '68, the Third World Liberation Front came into existence. In May of 1968, there was a joint TWLF and SDS sit-in around expelling Air Force ROTC from the campus. And I just put the quote up for you to see the kind of thinking that was going on among students. That the administration willingly offers its facilities for the training of Air Force officers who will use their knowledge against the people of the Third World, and it deprives Third World students of their rights to an adequate education. Now, that kind of represents much of the pre-strike activities prior to the clear emergence of the BSU as the leading student force on the campus. But before I get to that, I want to talk about the repression that was paralleling it. So as the left took over student government and the right wing lost control of student government, the first action the right wing students took was to turn the names of those who were elected into the state unemployment activities, the state Un-American Activities Committee as potential subversives. So all of us got included on little postcards that they had up there. The Summer Community Involvement Leadership Training Program was so threatening to the administration on this campus that they convened lawyers. It was the first time we learned that lawyers are only representatives of opinions. And depending on what you want, depends on what you get a lawyer based on what you want. We didn't know that at that point, so they had the lawyer. And the lawyer determined that all of the law is against our Summer Community Involvement Leadership Program. In fact, it represents a misuse of the funds. It involves off-campus activities and educational programs like the tutorial program, which are expressly forbidden for student funds to be used to do those kinds of things. Horses' asses. Okay. Now, as Black and Third World student leadership and consciousness gained prominence on the campus, the repression accelerated and became more extreme. And I want to hit that for a moment. I believe the turning point on this campus was the moment when white students understood that something was going on far more significant than what they were in the process of learning, and that the acceptance of Black and Third World leadership as the leadership to be followed would alter all of our collective lives. It's critical that that could occur, and I believe that the strike could not have occurred without that. And it was a critical turning point. Now, the resistance continued to build and harden. I know this is hard to believe, but the right wing in the state of California put up the funds to support a managed takeover of the then daily newspaper called The Gator in 1 year and student government the next year. External forces from the university funded a takeover of those. As soon as the student government leadership from the right wing was back in place, they immediately wrote to the Board of Trustees demanding an investigation, saying that the college administration is encouraging racism and countenancing intimidation and threats of violence. That was followed by a flyer that went out to every registered voter in the state of California by some jerk named Vanderveer, who talked about the position of the San Francisco State College administration has been to rationalize and justify what we believe the California taxpayers will find inappropriate, if not illegal, use of funds. Now, if that wasn't enough, now all the elected state officials began to put their sense in. Max Rafferty, bless his heart, who was the superintendent of public instruction, decided he needed to inform the citizens of California that he would not allow the inmates to run the institution. John Summerskill, who was the president during the time of the BSU MAPS protest, had the wisdom to understand what was going on, said that protest brought together for the first time various radical elements on the campus with their supporters from various communities. We have never been confronted by this group of people. BSU people do not talk to SDS people, but this time they're talking and acting in unison. And then finally, the Third World Liberation Front Air Force ROTC protest, the then governor of the state, Ronald Reagan, escalated that sit-in to a confrontation at the highest level, declaring that now it was a state issue. Now here's where we were just prior to the strike. 14% of the students on this campus were non-white. With the request for support to increase those admissions, the BSU Third World Liberation Front was met by the president saying, no funds are available, but we'll go to the state and try to get you more money. A week later, though, that same president found $30,000 to increase the budget for the athletics department. The trustees directed the campus, whichever president, and they would direct it until they found a president who would implement a directive to suspend George Murray as an English instructor for what they considered inappropriate behavior. I put this on here because I knew where we'd be meeting. The trustees also voted down a college union design of the most beautiful structure you all would be, and instead put you in a bomb shelter.
Yes.
So
That's what you're in now.
that's what you are, yeah, that's where we're sitting. But believe me, what you almost got was amazing. And then the trustees also imposed a set of regulations forbidding the use of student funds going forward for any of the types of activities. So that's kind of, as the movement grew and developed and expanded, so did the movement to repress it. And in those battles, wherever you look at them, the full force of the state gets used to repress. It generally prevails. And it is our thanks and gratitude that go to the leadership of the BSU Third World Liberation Front, that what they managed to get out of that confrontation with the massive power of the United States, a College of Ethnic Studies for San Francisco State.
I'm Jared Varnado, one of the founders of the Black Student Union. I came here in 1963. I had never been in a classroom with a white student. I had never seen an Asian person. I had never seen a Latinx person, not in my whole life, because I grew up in Magnolia, Mississippi. That is like a concentration camp at that time, in the 40s and the 50s. So when I came here, I was standing in that long line that you have when you register, and I could never have thought this. The only person that I met, and we became lifelong friends, standing in line with me, was the future Minister of Education of the Black Panther Party, George Mason Murray, and myself, one of the founders of the Black Student Union. We never ever thought about that. We were thinking about how to get enough food to eat. So, as time went by, we began to become members of the Negro Student Association, which was an outgrowth from the Civil Rights Movement. We felt that we had to do something in order to support the Civil Rights Movement. So, after a period of time, Mariana Wadi came on board. She was, I think, the first chairman of the Black Student Union. And she was very difficult. But she held us accountable. She held everybody accountable, and I loved her for that. And she's still a great person. So as time went by, we began to think about redefining ourselves. Like we didn't want to be Negroes anymore, because as people of color, we have been darkies, coons, all of the other things that you can possibly think of. So after this period of time, other people came forward, and in 1965, Garrett came to the campus. I was living at the fraternity house at that time. Any Alpha Phi Alpha people out there? And so Garrett kept after me to spend more time with the Black Student Union. I didn't want to do it. All I wanted to do was go to school, get a degree, and get out of here. I didn't want to go to jail like I had to. Like any of you all been to jail? As Mike Tyson said, that's not a place you want to be. So that's not what I wanted. I wanted to get out of here, get a job, and stuff like that, but that's not the way life played out. So Garrett kept after me. So when we finally decided on a new name for the organization, it became the Black Student Union. That's who we were. And there was big fights that went on. People felt that we should keep the name and that we were too radical, that we were like what we call, some of you, mother country radicals. We were way too radical. So we finally changed the name, and we began to set forth a new course. First, we wanted to bring in more black students onto the campus as students. Now, most black students were afraid to come out to San Francisco State. That included me. I had this inferiority complex. I would go back to the back of the class and sit because I thought white kids knew more than me, until I found out later that was not true. And you couldn't get people from Hunters Point to leave Hunters Point to come out to San Francisco State. I'm going to move along faster. So as we move forward, I ran for student council, lost, and I agreed to help write our mission statement for the Black Student Union. Garrett and Mariam left San Francisco State. And a new group was in charge from then on because we had elections, and Benny Stewart was the new chairman. I don't know why he would want to be that, because nobody else did. And you know, you take a poll and say, who wants to be chairman? Not me. You know, so as time went by, we had more and more students, black students, and there was one situation where the student newspaper criticized Muhammad Ali for not going into the military. So we couldn't let that stand. So we had a little meeting, and we sent a crew up there. That's what it would be called today. That's what those rappers call it. We sent a crew up there, and some are very famous people. And then they beat up the editor of the newspaper, and they beat up everybody in the room. One hit the editor with the right cross, and the right cross knocked him down under his seat, out his side. So then we were known as hooligans, as violent people, and we were violent. If you came around and you wanted to work against us, you got deep trouble. Deep trouble. We're not going to let that lay. You know, then as time went by, we became, every black person on campus became a member of the Black Student Union, and people would help out each other. Like my wife worked in the cafeteria. So when the athletes would come through there, they would be hungry. And she would take patties of meat and put it under the bread whenever she served them, which meant that like they got just a little bit more. And they always remembered this. They remember it to this day. Nobody had to tell her to do that. Nobody. So we moved forward. I want to move forward to the strike. The strike was very, very, very violent, and there was no other way that it could be. I don't know any other way it could be because we were under attack. And when we got all our forces together, and all the troops, in terms of the Third World Liberation Front, we were hell to deal with. Very, 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 very difficult. See if I have anything else to say here. We're going to get to the settlement of the strike and the Hayakawa years a little later today. But there was also, I'm missing a point, there was also the black soldiers who came out of the military who came here used the GI Bill to get an education. And I don't want to forget the black fraternities and sororities. They were the ones who helped start the strike. They came to us and they said, the college won't let us use facilities, but they let the white fraternities use them. So that was something we had to do something about. But I want to say this before I leave. About 7 or 8 years ago, I asked Dr. Ken Montero, I said, like, why aren't there any classrooms that have our name on it? Why aren't there any classrooms that have Black Student Union, Third World Liberation Front? And I was told that you have to purchase these things. Well, over at Merritt, they have a lounge called the Huey Newton Bobby Seale Lounge. At least you know that Huey and Bobby came through there. There's nothing on this campus that shows that we ever been here. Nothing. You know, we talk about it, but there should be rooms everywhere on the campus that say, that's the Black Student Union room, that's the TWLF room, that is this room and that room. And I want to leave you with that. Thank you.
We have about 15 minutes for interaction, discussion. There's a...
Thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Relevance Abdelhadi. I'm the director of the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diaspora Studies program.
We'll see you.
Okay, yes. I'm the director of the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diaspora Studies program, and we're going today through the same thing that you were going through in 1968. I wanted to just appreciate what you have done, beginning with placing it in international context, because we're still dealing with now the finance, capital. There is a reason why there is no rooms, and there are no rooms because they need to be purchased. But we're dealing also with the same kind of rules that keep getting imposed every single day to curb student activism, to stop us from doing what we need to do, to follow up on the spirit of 68, education for social justice. And faculty and students and staff here know what I am talking about. I'm not going to go all the details, it's going to come through. But I wanted to raise and we're called radicals today, we're called terrorists, we're called anti-Semitic. There's all sorts of things we are actually called specifically in order to separate us from each other, silence some of us, in order not to support the others. So these formulas are still going on and the challenges are coming up again. My question is what actually Loreen started with. You know, we're calling, so it's okay to call you Loreen? Dr. Yeah. Comrade Loreen. What Loreen started with is saying we. We and what does we mean? Who are we? Today, when we come to commemorate the 1968 strike and the founding of the College of Ethnic Studies, as a result, specific result of the strike, who are we? Who belongs in the we? And who is considered outside of the we? Not only by us, but the powers that be. And how do we preserve the legacy of 1968 and make sure that none of us are excluded and are sent outside of it because of some foreign policy objectives or because of some neoliberalism or because there are some dependence on donors and so on. So that's really a big question for me, for my students, and when I say students, I'm not talking about only Arabs, Muslims, and Palestinians. I'm talking about all the students who are interested in justice. Students from various programs in the College of Ethnic Studies, as well as white students, including Jewish students, who have also been denied to speak up because their voices contradict the voices of those parts in the Jewish community that align with the university. Thank you.
Just in terms of a quick response, let me say this, that in building a movement within, we were, as Terry likes to say, we're internationalists. I guess maybe because I had my own life, I came out of SNCC. I came out of Student Endowment Coordinating Committee. I was trained as an organizer. When I came to this campus, I had, about 3 months before I had come to this campus, I had already visited North Vietnam. That was in the fall of 1965. That was before the military got there. I was there. I was there before Jane Fonda was there. So we already had those kinds of connections, but we didn't see ourselves as being supporters of the various movements in the world. We saw ourselves as being a part of the various movements in the world. So that we didn't see it as providing, simply providing support services and raising money. we received, our relationships were such that we received congratulations from Cho and Lai Mao Zedong. We received congratulations from the workers and farmers movement in Vietnam. We received placards from the Pan-Africanist Congress in South Africa. You know, we had direct connections, and some of us had already traveled to Cuba. So our relationships we didn't have a kind of a dim thing about who the we was. And nobody ever asked us. Because if you identified yourself as being black on this campus, and some people identified themselves as being black with blue-eyed, blonde, their thing is, we want to be with you. One of the leading organizers in terms of developing research and foundations for the black student, who was a woman who was born in the concentration camps, the Japanese concentration camps, not Magnolia, Mississippi, that I know well. What I'm trying to say is this, that whatever struggles that are going, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission. Fast went on. That was our lesson. Each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. Trying to lay out a historical context in the post-war period. This is not the same. This is not 1966 or 67 or 68. You can draw on and use some of the same tools, but one has to use students and faculty. Let me start over again. You faculty and students have an obligation to help each other discover the mission and engage in the struggle around the amelioration of the people of the world, the planet and the people of the world. That's the work. That kind of work has to go on under these social circumstances. That little flimsy piece that I put out earlier, for me, here it is. It'll take at least 50 years to reconstruct the destruction that's taking place right now under this crypto-fascist program that's being oriented and developed. And it affects the entire world. Today, this morning you wake up and the world is shifting and changing. The U.S. military is now leaving Syria as of today. Well, it doesn't mean anything except that you have a whole group right now that's trying to put together a program in the federal government to start drafting people without regard to gender. So what happens if a draft program comes up? I mean, a military draft. Why were white students involved so deeply in the anti-war movement? Their parents, their loved ones, and they themselves didn't want to go and die in Vietnam. Very concrete interest. So the work that has to be done, man, there's not going to be anything boring for the next 20 or 25 years in this country, because whatever you do, whatever skills that you learn, if there's a program structure, here, we built a program. That Center for Educational Innovation was a program. Black Arts and Culture, it was programmatic to go up to Hunters Point and go down to Fillmore and recruit, dragging, kicking, and screaming. Go ask Danny Glover how he got to campus. Kicking and screaming to get to this campus, right? Making spaces for people like Dr. Ramona Tasco, who comes on the campus from a Catholic school, well-trained, well-tutored, well-prepared, and told not to put out or express who you are. Who you don't have to reconstruct the basic skills, but reconstruct oneself. And so this is now world famous physician comes out of that framework. Why? Because some people sat down and had the heart and the guts and the mind and the ability and the will to engage in critical thinking. And to take those risks and to go to jail and go to prison and to lose family, to lose wives and children, to lose parents who broke with us in some cases because we did what we felt we had to do at that historical moment. This is another historical moment. People are talking about the Green Deal, that might be something you draw on. Find a way to prepare yourselves for serious work, for the uplift of the broader community and your local communities. That is the work. How that's done here at San Francisco State, we're not going to resolve that today. What we do say is, anyone who wants to engage in creating conditions where people can develop to their full human potential. That's who we are. We have about 5 minutes more. I don't do Mike's spell. Anybody else? Students, faculty, anybody?
I salute you all for the effort. That's really all I wanted to say. Hearing you guys' story and hearing you guys' struggles and hearing what you guys did to pave the way for people like me and for people who have, who of my complexion, making this. Sorry.
No, you're doing fine. You should have seen how Glover was. He started him years. It wasn't a prestige impediment. It was getting himself together. One of the great actors of the world.
Right.
So you started here, right?
Yeah.
We'll get you going. Don't worry.
But I just really wanted to salute you guys for these efforts that you've done and for doing this strike and for standing up for what you believe in, because it's an inspiration for people like me and for me being able to say how I feel and express how I feel without the limitations that people have put upon me as an African American male in this generation. You guys have paved the way for me to say, if they can do it, if these people can do it, then I can do it as well, myself, as an African American.
I have a question, and my name is Ted Weisfeld. I was a striker. Can you recall what the tuition was when we came to state colleges?
$48 a
Wait. One person say, wait. No, hold on. Nobody's gonna run you away. Hold on. Let's find out the answer to the first question.
$48.
$48 per credit?
48 a semester, 96 a year. $3 if you want to
Hold on, wait a minute, sir. Wait a minute. See, let's start off, let's answer the question. The tuition, fees, everything, the first thing I paid for the spring of 1966. I paid $62.50 for everything. $62, all my courses, everything. Hello? What does that tell you? What does that tell you? How much is the fees and tuitions for a full-time student at San Francisco State now?
How much?
About somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000 is what it costs to go here for a year, right? All right, so mine in 2 was 120, yours is 20 and 30. Somebody's being gamed, somebody being hustled, and I got paid to go to school, right? Nobody came to me and said, you have to take a loan out that puts you in Dutch for almost the rest of your productive life for taking these loans. So, you know what I'm for? I'm for what's they call a jubilee on all these school debts. Wipe the school debts out. Well, how does that happen? You organize to get rid of the debts. So look, hey, same thing Jimmy Garrett said. $60. Now that's a jubilee meaning out of the South. Jubilee means freedom. Freedom from that debt. That might be part of the Green Deal. I don't care what it is. But that operates in your interest. That's your that's the same thing as going to Vietnam to fight a war. If you owe $100,000 out of a state school that's set up to give you the richest education at the lowest possible price, then they ought to be paying you to go to school. You the 1%, the guy on Facebook could pay for everybody on this campus to go to school, wouldn't have to pay $8 and wouldn't have to live in those trucks and stuff out there up and down the street, not to be homeless, to have food and clothing and shelter. That's what you're organizing something different now. But you're organized just as hard just as rich, but hey, between Facebook and Google, nobody at any state college in this country should pay a dime to go to school. They'll pay you to go to school.
Don't be sorry. My second question is for the whole panel. I would like your impression. Do you think that what we did contributed to the change in the amount of tuition that is now charged to college students?
I think when the student population changed from a dominant white institution to an institution populated by students of color, the desire to keep the tuition low from the state became less on purpose. So that the number of white managerial level people that were needed were in place given the change in the economy, so that if you want to go to school now, you're going to have to pay for it.
It went from, I'll end with this, went from education as a right, to education as a privilege. The whole philosophical notion of the purpose of education shifted when the ruling people had gotten all theirs in, drained all the resources, and then the whole shift, that's a whole shift. So whereas education was the third largest industry in 1950, what is replaced by is the prison industrial complex. Becomes the third largest industry in this country because now you have people are redundant and you got to do something with them, and what you do with them is render them idle and obsolete and put them in prison. That's the big shift. So they make these state schools semi-private schools and make the students here pay almost as much as you do going to some of the liberal arts private schools. You're paying $20,000 or $30,000 a year. That's essentially what you're paying. Not Harvard, where you might pay $150,000 or $200,000, but that's for the people. That's for the ruling class anyway. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it.